Hello and welcome to the Sports Psychology Podcast with Michael Ceely. I'm excited today to tell you about my guest, Tyler Pazik of the Pazik Performance Group. He's a mental performance coach. He has a master's degree in sports psychology, and he walks the walk, doesn't just talk the talk. He not just consults, he doesn't just coach, he challenges himself with physical situations. In fact, has done a 100-mile ultra marathon run. I first discovered Tyler on Instagram, and what I really liked about Tyler is the energy that he brings to his message. I see a lot of quality, a lot of substance there, and a lot of energy and passion behind his work, so you can tell he loves what he does. And Tyler Pazik, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Maybe we could just start out with a little bit about your background and what got you interested in this field.
Yeah, so I've always really been a coach, I would say, even from the time I was like 9 years old. I was, coaching my teammates out on the baseball field. And one time I actually got pulled from a baseball game because I'm a lefty, but I was playing second base. And then during the game, I went over and taught my shortstop how to field a ground ball. And my coach, Coach Zuckerman, if you're listening to this podcast, shout out to Coach Z. But he pulled me from the game. And then after the inning got done, he's like, Tyler, you need to be playing your position, not coaching. I'll do the coaching. I was like, all right, sounds good. So I've been coaching since I was young. And then how I got into sports psychology was I actually took a sports psych class in college, and I really enjoyed it. My teacher, she was amazing, and she got into sports psychology when she was in her 50s and went back to school and got her master's in sports psychology, and then started teaching classes at the university. And then after college, I was coaching baseball, and I'm like, oh man, I really like coaching the mental game a little bit more than I like coaching the physical skill acquisition side. So I looked up to see if, you could make money being a sports psych, and sure enough, you can. So then I looked at different schools around the country and came upon TCU down in Fort Worth, Texas. And from there, I went to TCU. I kind of got the research side of things from them, and I mentored underneath this guy named Brian Kane, who lived less than 15 minutes from my mom's house. And so he's really good at the applied side, and so I got the applied side of sports psychology from him, and I got the research side from TCU, and that's really my start. And while I was at TCU, they're in the Big 12 conference, which is a Power 5 conference in the U.S., and I reached out to a bunch of different schools, and one of the first schools to get back to me was the University of Maine, and I started doing some stuff with them, and then also the University of Oklahoma got back to me, and I just started reaching out and went and did some free stuff with them, just mental imagery, self-talk, body language, confidence overall, and that's really how I got into it. And now I've been doing it full-time for 5 years-ish. So yeah, that's how I got started in sports psych.
And so would you say that baseball is the sport you played the most, prior to doing this?
Yeah, I grew up playing baseball, so played since I was 4 or 5 years old, and I played in college at Indiana State, which is Division I in Terre Haute, Indiana, just about 45 minutes west of Indianapolis.
Cool. Yeah, I played Little League as a kid. I'm a Midwestern kid. This is from near Madison, Wisconsin. And so actually a little town called Barneveld, west of Madison, Wisconsin. And we're a tiny little town, but I loved baseball. Grew up watching the Milwaukee Brewers. They're still my favorite team. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, hopefully we can talk a little bit.
It's kind of funny. My family. I have two cousins that went to Barneveld High School, and my little cousin, wow. She's just graduated. She was a softball pitcher there. My mom grew up in Belleville.
No kidding.
Which is right next to there.
No kidding. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Small
Wow.
world.
Okay. So if we would have talked a little bit more before the podcast, I would have known that. This is a total surprise. That's super exciting. I mean, that's random, huh?
Yeah, so I've been through Barneveld quite a bit actually.
Oh, that's so funny. Wow. Yeah, that is amazing. Yeah, so, I love baseball. You do obviously too. Hopefully we can talk a little bit about that today. But I wanted to touch on, an area of expertise that you deal with, which I've seen some of your videos as well, which is having a written process or like a checklist for having an athlete have that. And talk a little bit more about the importance of that, maybe if there's any reluctance to doing that, the power of doing that, of having a written process.
Yeah, so when I talk to coaches or I hear coaches or hear players talk about the mental game, one phrase that I hear a lot is like trust the process, you know. And when it comes to the process, I like that phrase, trust the process. But there's this underlying message there that is saying like you have a process to go to. And so it's being able to know what your process is. That way you can use it intentionally and consciously and use it as a system instead of just saying, hey, trust the process. Like, okay, well, what am I supposed to trust in, coach? I think there's a miscommunication there between the coaches and the players. They don't necessarily know what their process is. So instead of that phrase building confidence within them, they might actually be like, oh, well, I don't really have a process. Or like when they start to struggle, they are like, what is my process? And it creates more of a lack of clarity and confusion than anything else. So like going back and delineating like, okay, what actually is my process for thinking, and then also what is my process for the physical behaviors that I'm going through. Because like consistent thoughts lead to consistent behaviors, and consistent behaviors lead back to consistent thoughts. So you can start with either one. It's like, okay, here's what I like to think about when I'm doing my sport, right? And then you have the physical side of the game where it's like, okay, these are the things that I'm physically doing. And you want to match those two up so that when you go through a physical behavior, it helps you to think more clearly or simplify down what you're thinking about in order to stay focused out there. So some people might have like a mantra or an affirmation or like that anchor statement that anchors their mind and helps them come back to that focus during their sport. So, for baseball, it might literally be as easy as see the ball. And you're just telling yourself, see the ball, see the ball, see the ball. Well, in your process, before the pitch happens, you might tap the plate with your bat. And that physical action is like a mental checkpoint for you to say like, okay, am I thinking about what I need to be thinking right now? Or am I not? And then once you become aware of your thoughts, it's like, is this thought helping me or hurting me? Is this thought productive or unproductive? You can ask yourself any of those questions. And ultimately it gets back to hopefully this thought that is actually helping you perform. And so taking that outside of baseball, I know we were talking about cycling before we got on. It might be something like pull, 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 pull. On each pedal that you take, you're telling yourself pull your leg up, so that you're not just pushing down on the pedal, but you're also pulling on the pedal at the same time to help you keep your cadence, keep your speed, and so on and so forth. And then also just help you stay focused so you're not drifting off during the race. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh, wow, that mile was, a few seconds slower than where I need to be because you let your mind just sort of trail off. So going back to the process, though, it's connecting that thought to the behavior that you are partaking in so that you can actually, stay focused out there in your game, scrimmage, or competition, whatever that might be.
Yeah, you're mentioning it's kind of like an anchor. Makes me think like if you are under stress in like your most intense, stressful situation in your sport, and if you have this written process that you've codified, and it's just, you know it by heart, that if you're getting out of your zone, you can go right back to those key thoughts that would trigger those key successful behaviors. So I think that athletes, they take for granted, or they don't articulate the process. And if you can articulate your success process, automate it so that it's just there and you know it by heart, then the times of adversity, you can just go right back to that. So I think that, too few athletes and coaches pay attention to that process and actually writing it down. So I think that's a great thing that you do, and I think that more athletes, need to do that for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then it sort of widens out from there, right? Like we're creating this funnel into our performance, and it goes out further. So like you can start with that in-game, in-competition process for your thinking and your behaviors, but then it goes out from there into your, your pregame stuff, and then it goes out from there into your AM routines and your PM routines, and also with your diet and with your sleep and with your what you're doing to help you build that skill of focus outside of your sport. So, like your meditation or your journaling, whatever that might be, to help you build clarity around your thinking and your thought process. Because that's what it comes back to, is like your self-awareness, right? Like the more self-aware you become, then the more self-control you'll have. And the more self-control you have, then the more performance control you'll have. And so everyone wants to have that ability to be able to control their performance at a higher level. Well, then that means that you need to be able to control your thoughts and emotions and behaviors. And then that means that you need to build awareness around what are my thoughts and emotions and behaviors. And it's not saying that you need to like all of them initially, right? But you do need to build this awareness and have that self-responsibility and self-acceptance in order to move forward and change them for the better, so that you could start getting more of what you want in the future. Yeah. And one sort of like equation that I come back to that I learned from this sports psych out in New Jersey named Dr. Rob Gilbert. He talks about A plus ST plus Goya equals R. So ability plus strategy plus getting off your anatomy is how he says it. But Goya, G-O-Y-A, get off your anatomy, otherwise take action, gets you the results that you want. And so like a lot of people think that when they're not getting the result that they want, like the amateur athlete, they might go back and they might blame it on their ability. And they might be like, oh, I suck, I'm not good enough. Or other people are way better than me, right? And they'll sort of place their thinking in that realm. But in reality, like the highest level athletes, they understand that, no, okay, I have the ability and I have the ability to take action. I just need to start implementing the right strategy into my process to start getting the results that I want. And when you look at athletes that do get the results that they want, it's mainly comes back to the strategy. Like, oh man, I prepared harder than anybody else. Like, I understand my process. I went up there with a plan and I executed my plan. It rarely ever comes back to their ability or their ability to take action. Usually it's their lack of action that doesn't get them the results that they want. But they still have the ability to change and implement a new strategy in order to get the results that they need. And another kind of quote that I come back to is like, winners lose more than losers lose. And so the crux of that quote is that basically a winner has tried and failed more times than the loser has. The loser has given up. And so it's okay to lose, but the only time you're really a failure is when you give up, or you fail to learn from your experience, learn from that loss, and then either try something new or go back to your process. And say you got like a 5-step process, right? It's looking back at it and being like, okay, number 4 is not serving me. So let's take that out, just like if you were to like change the pieces of a computer hardware, right? And you're like, okay, let's take this piece out and implement this piece and see if we can get this computer running more smoothly.
So it's really a lot about taking ownership and responsibility of your process. First of all, having the awareness of what actually is the process. So having a coach and teach the players that, hey, articulate your process, build awareness. And once you have full awareness of what works for you, what doesn't, then you have ownership. You can take responsibility. You don't blame other people. You don't blame the wrong thing. You're not just guessing. It's all to the surface of your consciousness. And you're like, okay, I see everything, even the scary stuff. So after, say, a quote unquote defeat, you can articulate, here's exactly what went wrong. I skipped this part of my process. Oh, that's why. Or conversely, if you have like success, do you encourage your athletes to say journal about successes, about like what worked, and build it that way too?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's actually like a very strong foundation to build your process from, is like, okay, what is working for me right now? What is going right and well for me right now? And then building upon that and really doubling down on their strengths first. That way they can see, okay, like here's where I'm building a lot of my, or getting a lot of my confidence from. And then from there, sort of working on the little things that can make the difference in the long run. But yeah, I would say that their strengths, that's a great place to start, especially with people who are just getting into the mental game and building their self-awareness, because then that keeps them going, instead of continually beating them down on like, okay, hey, let's fix this weakness. Let's fix this weakness. Right. It's like, man, dude, this is tough. This is a never-ending process, right? So, especially at first, it's a little bit, it's a little bit easier on them to build upon their strengths than it is to just continually look at how they're not doing well. But yeah, I would say also in terms of like the psychological side of things, like building confidence within yourself and that self-reliance, when it comes to having a productive, positive mindset, it's understanding like what is actually helping you. What are the thoughts that and the beliefs that you have that are helping you perform and really getting over those challenges and those adversities. And then going back and being like, okay, here's where I can improve. A great post game, post scrimmage, post competition journaling activity is sort of asking yourself, okay, like what went really well today for me? And then you go through and you say one or two or three things that went really well, and then you say, okay, what could go better moving forward? Or what's one limiting thought that I had today? Or what's one thing that I did, a physical action that I took that didn't necessarily work out the way that I wanted it to? And then you ask yourself, okay, how could I make this better? How am I going to change it for next time? So one of the questions that I like to ask my athletes is like, what's a thought that you caught today at your practice, scrimmage, game, competition? And again, it's just building that awareness around like you're always having thoughts out there. So did you catch yourself even having a good time today? Like, oh yeah, I caught myself telling myself like, oh wow, this is actually fun, and building on that. Or they might say, wow, I caught this thought of just like this ultimate belief and being able to push myself, and I caught myself cheering myself on during today's practice. And then other days they show up and they're like, oh man, like now that I'm looking back at it, I really caught myself thinking about how much today's practice sucked, or how much today's workout was just like not enjoyable, and I just like kept that same mindset the entire time instead of noticing it in the moment and accepting it and then being able to replace it with something that was actually going to help me.
I like how it rhymes too, like, well, the thought that you caught today, right? So having it built into a daily process where you catch yourself thinking positively, having positive self-talk, and then maybe you catch yourself with some negative self-talk, and bringing that in as a daily routine. Do you find some resistance from athletes of like, I don't want to do homework, I don't want to write it down? Do you find some resistance in that?
Yes, I would say for sure. There are athletes that I work with that they just don't do that initially, and it might take a little bit longer to get them on board. But also those athletes that don't do that, they wind up trailing off, and we might not necessarily work together for that long of a time because it's like they're not seeing the results that they want to see, but they're also not putting in the work that's necessary to get better. And so at the end of the day, as a coach, you want to hopefully be building a relationship with them. And it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes, like, not every coach is meant for every person, and so sometimes if I don't connect with an athlete, then I will refer them to somebody else and be like, hey, or I'll bring in somebody else into the conversation, and I'll have them talk to the athlete, and then maybe there'll be that epiphany that happens, or that click and that switch happens in their brain where they're like, oh, okay, like that makes sense now. It literally might just be the way that I'm saying it that is not connecting with them. And then I bring in somebody else and they say the same thing in their own words, and the athlete's like, oh man, like now I get it. But yeah, that does happen every once in a while, especially with the younger generation right now. They I would say it's a little bit, actually that's not true, not the younger generation. It's just that the ones that really want it, I would say, versus the ones that maybe their parents sent them to me instead of them actively reaching out. It's a little bit different. So before we even dive into the journaling aspect and the self-awareness aspect, we really dive into like, okay, what are your long-term goals? Like, where do you see yourself in the future? Like, what do you want in your life? And they've never been asked those questions before. They've just been told by their parents, or they've just been told by their friends, like, oh, you're really good at what you do, but they don't understand like why they are good at what they do, or like that's the reason why they keep going, instead of this intrinsic belief. They have all this these extrinsic factors going on that are really keeping them going, even though that's really just a short-term solution that doesn't help them in the long run.
Yeah. Well, I love what you say about how, like the why, the big reason has to be there in the first place. It makes me think you can have actually really high-performing athletes who are doing it for, quote-unquote, the wrong reason, maybe just to impress their parents or just because they're, inherently talented. But I think that having that passion, that fire, that drive is necessary, and that for you, being able to recognize that honestly as a coach, and also working with other coaches too. I would imagine there's other coaches out there that don't maybe ask those deeper questions of their athletes or get them excited about the deeper reasons of why they play. That they're just there. They just assume that all the athletes are there because they 100% want to be there. But I would imagine bringing some more awareness to other coaches too, like, can you have your athletes maybe even write a mission statement about why they love what they do, or why are we as a team, why do we do this? Like, I think that question isn't asked enough, especially with coaches. What do you think?
So I agree with you, though. Like, coaches themselves need to ask themselves why they're doing it, and then also the players asking them, like, okay, what's one reason that you're here right now? And genuinely want to know the answer, not just, and reading their body language, and hopefully you have some sort of relationship with them so that you can see, like, okay, do I feel like they're telling the truth right now, or do I feel like they're just telling me what I want to hear? And I think that the more you ask that question, and the more you ask that question in different ways, eventually you'll see a change in their literal being in that moment around when it finally clicks for them, and you're like, okay, now it sounds like you believe what you just said. So yeah, I agree though. That question needs to get asked. Question needs to get asked more.
Yeah. No, I think it's just having the reason, the deeper reason, and drilling down. Tyler, I know you got to run, so I want to wrap things up. Wish we had a little more time to talk. Maybe we can do this again. But I wanted to finish off by just saying it's been great talking with you, discovering all of your work. Again, your energy and passion and your knowledge that you bring and tie it all together really comes across. I love your stuff. Where can people learn more about you? Where can they find you online?
You can find me online on Instagram, so at Pazik Performance Group. That's Pazik Performance Group. And then also I have a website, pazikperformancegroup.com. And then if you want to reach out via email, tyler@pazikperformancegroup.com, or literally just pick up the phone, shoot me a text, call me, 847-922-1371.
I love it. Tyler Pazik, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. Love what you do. Everyone, check out his work. I think it'll be a big help for you.